Welcome to another Tweedy Pubs video. It has been mentioned in the comments that I haven't been to any Wetherspoons pubs. Now, this isn't that I have anything against Sir Tim Martin's chain of pubs per se, but they just tend to be modern pubs, and this is a channel mostly about historic pubs and pub history. Until now, I've just never really felt it sort of fit with the theme, but I'm beginning to think maybe I'm missing out on something here. Yes, most Wetherspoons pubs are modern conversions, and I think most of the ones we're going to see today are from the 1990s or thereabout. They previously were something other than a pub, but I think that means they have interesting stories to tell and interesting histories in their own right. So I'm going to focus just on central London today. I'm going to pick a handful of what I think are the most historic, interesting Wetherspoons pubs. Starting today's tour at Baker Street. Pub number one is the Metropolitan Bar. Cheers from the Metropolitan Bar. This was originally the Chiltern Court restaurant, and it can be seen in a documentary made by John Betjeman in the 1970s called Metroland. This is part of the large Chiltern Court development which looms all the way over the top of Baker Street station. It's a neoclassical building. The construction was started in around 1911, but then had to be paused because of World War I. It wasn't really fully completed until the late 1920s. Chiltern Court is faced with Portland stone, and in that sense it has an air of a sort of governmental building of the like you might see on Whitehall. There's a run of Diocletian windows along one side of the building, and the entrance to the pub is nestled between two entrances to Baker Street station, so you need to go up a short flight of stairs to get into it. It was built by the Metropolitan Railway. It was designed by Charles Walter Clark, their in-house architect, who also designed a number of the stations along the Metropolitan line. The restaurant opened in 1929. I found a lovely press clipping about a press luncheon ahead of the opening. It says, although everything is new and luxurious in the new restaurant, nothing is ostentatious, and brightness has been achieved without bizarre effect. The decorations combine harmony of form and colour. The ceiling, supported by a series of finely proportioned columns, is embellished with the coats of arms of the various counties and boroughs through which the Metropolitan Railway passes. I found those coats of arms on the ceiling particularly fascinating. They cover the 4 counties through which the Metropolitan Railway passes. You can see in there the coat of arms of Hertfordshire, which involves a stag, the coat of arms of Buckinghamshire, and that's a swan, and in particular that's the Bohun swan, the one with a sort of crown around its neck and a chain. The coat of arms of the now defunct county of Middlesex, that's 3 knives, or to use the correct heraldic term, seaxes, which is a kind of Saxon knife. I think it's an Old English name for a knife. It's a curved blade with a notch in it, and it also features a Saxon crown. There's also the coat of arms of the City of London, which is the George's Cross with a sword pointed upwards. Many more coats of arms as well. I couldn't recognise many of the rest of them. I think they possibly even relate to the towns and other boroughs along the Metropolitan Railway. And there's also the coat of arms of the Metropolitan Railway itself, which is a combination of those 4 first county coat of arms: Middlesex, Hertfordshire, Buckinghamshire and the City of London. Those finely proportioned columns mentioned in that newspaper article are a very striking feature of the interior. They're each flanked by fluted, I think, composite pilasters. They have a mixture in the capitals of the Corinthian style and the Ionic style. The friezes along the walls are also interesting. Much of this plasterwork is gilded. The friezes have a design of grapevines laden with bunches of grapes, very fitting, of course, for a pub. I also found a clock rather caught my eye in that it's somewhat in keeping with that gilded plasterwork theme. The restaurant was initially built primarily to serve the residents in the apartments that Chiltern Court was filled with, but it gradually over time became more of a sort of station pub, or station restaurant I should say, station waiting room. H.G. Wells lived in Chiltern Court and possibly would have used the restaurant in the 1930s, and he held a regular salon or book club at his flat here in Chiltern Court. Possibly hit it at a slightly bad time in terms of the beer offering, because they were cleaning all of the lines en masse, so none of the hand pumps were in service. So instead I went for some cider that they had behind the bar in one of those bag-in-box type arrangements. This is Old Rosie. There was an interesting collection, sort of 10 hand pumps. I think a couple of them are possibly duplicated, but hopefully you can see on screen there what is currently on offer. It is generally a very, very smart interior, I think. It's gleaming, it's really well maintained. I think this is a very good start to today's tour of Wetherspoons pubs in London. Number 2 on today's list. We're on the edge of Soho now, and this is the Montagu Pyke. Cheers from the Montagu Pyke. Both the Wetherspoons website and other sources that talk about the history of this pub. Again, this only came into being as a pub in the 1990s, but the prior history of the use of this building, most of the sources start at 1911. I'm going to go a little bit further back than that. If you're looking at the building from the outside on the Charing Cross Road entrance, look up and there is an old pub building to the left of it, now I think a Chinese restaurant. You can see at the top there is a pediment on that neighbouring building that has the name Tam O'Shanter and a date of 1896. Now that neighbouring pub had formerly been the Bull's Head. This site was probably the stabling, I think. The premises here were up for sale according to a newspaper article in the 1890s. And this site was called Bull's Head Yard. There's a reference to there being a forge here and stables and a coachmaker's based here. So it feels very likely to me that the Bull's Head, the neighbouring pub, was at one time a coaching inn. This was the site of the sort of stabling block. So enter Montagu Pyke, after whom the pub is named today. And in 1911 he created what was, I believe, his 16th cinema, and it was called the Cambridge Circus Cinematograph Theatre. Now this turned out to be quite an ill-fated cinema for Montagu Pyke. Alas, in 1915, just 4 years after the cinema opened, there was an accident, a fire in the basement when some old film stock caught fire, and Montagu Pyke was held personally responsible. Effectively, that accident ruined him and brought the end to his cinema empire. The sign for the pub that we see today is a picture of Montagu Pyke, and it's based on a Vanity Fair caricature. After the fire in 1915, the cinema was restored, reopened in 1916, and from then on had many different guises during World War II under its guise as the Tatler Cinema. It largely showed Soviet movies. One of those, the English name of it was In the Rear of the Enemy.
You see, they don't like it happen, so they do not have it.
Its days as a cinema eventually came to an end, and in 1988 the famous Marquee Club, which had long been a venue for typically more pop music earlier in its years, that moved here in 1988. The exterior that we see today is fairly plain, particularly the frontage. In fact, both frontages. It has two frontages, interestingly. There's one on Charing Cross Road, and there is another entrance onto Greek Street, probably into Soho. The frontage on Charing Cross Road is fairly plain. Of course, having formerly been a cinema, it wouldn't have had windows above the ground floor level. So we see this very almost bare frontage with 4 fluted pilasters, and the only decoration there today is a few hanging baskets above the ground floor. Inside it still has the original barrel-shaped auditorium from that 1911 build. It is quite a grand interior, not a huge amount of original ornamentation there, but it does have quite a nice sense of space. Still not perfect luck yet in terms of the beer offering. Certainly interesting lineup. There was one bear themed beer that particularly caught my eye on the bar. Alas, that was off. Its neighbouring pump also closed for line cleaning, so I ended up going for some Doom Bar, which is fine. It's I think £3.99 for a pint. Very good for central London. Pub number 3, we're over in Holborn now. This is the Shakespeare's Head. Cheers from the Shakespeare's Head. The exterior is a very interesting, very sort of grand and possibly slightly over the top building called Africa House, built in around 1921. It has a fascinating piece of carving on the exterior of the building, quite high up, so I suspect many people passing it in the street don't even look up to notice, but it is a sort of a depiction of Africa and very much a sort of sense of end of empire to it. It has Britannia positioned right in the middle in a possibly nowadays quite controversial setting, and she is flanked by elephants, camels, lions. For a very large part of the 20th century, the premises that are now occupied by the Shakespeare's Head pub were in fact a bank, a branch of a bank. For most of that time, it was a now defunct bank called Martins Bank. All of Martins Bank was bought by Barclays in 1969 and then continued as a branch of Barclays Bank until 1992. I'll put a link to the page about its former life as a branch of Martins Bank in the description below, because this is a really fascinating site. There was a considerable alteration to the interior of that bank in 1958, and there are very detailed descriptions of the layout. There is a floor plan, so you can imagine now when you're in this pub where the manager's office used to be, where the typing pool used to be, where the counter, of course, you know, the word bar counter in pubs originates probably in banking. The main entrance of the pub today is actually new, and that would have been a window in the days that this was a branch of Martins Bank and later Barclays Bank. A newspaper article I found from the year 2000 describing the pub talked about its sensitive refurbishment costing almost £1 million. Slightly confusing to me what exactly it was being sensitive of, because I get no sense today from the interior that we see of this modern Wetherspoons pub of any of those original bank fittings. One thing I do find quite satisfying about looking at the floor plan of when this used to be a bank is that the location of the ladies and gents is in fact the same today. Just behind me there, this corner of the layout behind me now would have been the manager's office. I think this area roughly corresponding to this large booth today would have been the typist room, and off to the other side the area, which is a slightly raised area today, possibly would have been the machinist room. In terms of the beer lineup, once again, a lot of Green King beers. You could almost be forgiven for thinking you're in a Green King pub in a lot of these Wetherspoons pubs. I'm not a big fan of Green King's IPA. I went for Wainwright Gold, which is something I have also seen in Green King pubs, so there must be some relationship there. Pub number 4, the Crosse Keys, over here in Bank in the City of London. Cheers from the Crosse Keys. This is the former London headquarters of the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation, which of course we know today as the brand HSBC. HSBC was formed in Hong Kong, as the name suggests, in the 1860s, during that period of British rule of Hong Kong. It was founded by Thomas Sutherland, and he was also the director of another company that we know today by its initials, Peninsula and Oriental Steam Navigation Company, which of course we know today as P&O. This site opened for business in 1913, and it was built extremely quickly when you consider how lavish the building is, both on the exterior and the interior. Just a year to construct this building. Once again, like the Metropolitan Bar or the Chiltern Hall that houses the Metropolitan Bar, it's faced with Portland stones, has a very sort of grand sense to it. It's a steel frame construction, which probably helped with the speed of building. The windows are crittle, and I think we can still see those in place today. That's very much a thing of that era. One particular point I thought was interesting was on the second floor on the exterior. You can see some cartouches. There's a line of 5 cartouches, and apparently they originally had Chinese characters representing some of the major cities of China at that time. For some reason these have since been removed. Perhaps what's most striking about the interior is the absolute riot of marble. We actually have quite a lot of examples of different types of marble here, at least 4 that I could count from the Historic England description of the interior. We have some American Cipollino, and that's a style that sort of looks like an onion cut in half. It's more normally associated with Italy or perhaps even Greece, but this particular variety apparently comes from America. There's Swedish marble, there's blue Ardennes marble, and there's also Pentelic marble. Now the Pentelic marble is perhaps one of my favourite features. Towards the back there is a balcony area with a carved marble piece that depicts 3 sort of cherub-like boys. The Historic England listing cites them as being 3 Chinese boys. Sort of thought perhaps the one on the left has a slightly more European appearance, and I wonder if this is meant to symbolise the Hong Kong and Shanghai banking corporation, if 2 of the boys are supposed to represent somehow Hong Kong and Shanghai, and the 3rd boy is somehow supposed to represent London. I don't know, perhaps reading too much into that. So those other 2 types of marble, we have American Cipollino and Swedish marble, which is a greenish colour. I think you can see that on the walls there. I think it's these columns that are referred to in the Historic England listing as having the blue Ardennes marble. It doesn't really look blue to me, it's some sort of greyish green, but I may have misread that. The Historic England listing also mentions that there's potentially an Adam fireplace in one of the rooms, roughly similar beer offering to the previous spoons we've seen today. Quite a big presence of Green King beers, at least 2 of the 5 hand pumps. They quite often have 2 different blocks of 5 hand pumps, so I may not have seen the full offering, but among the 5 hand pumps that I was looking at, 2 from Green King, I went for a bitter from the Dorset Brewing Company. I quite like this actually, and at £2.27, so you know, £4.50-ish for a pint. I think that's extremely good value, especially to be able to enjoy it in this incredibly opulent and I think quite well preserved interior. There is some sort of netting from the ceiling, which means you can't sort of fully appreciate the presumably plasterwork mouldings on the ceiling. There are some quite attractive ceiling lights towards the back of the pub. I suspect they're original given the style of the framing of those. Still in the City of London, and pub number 5, the final stop on today's tour of London Wetherspoons pubs. This is the Hamilton Hall, cheek by jowl with Liverpool Street Station. Cheers from the Hamilton Hall. I was saving this till last, thinking it was going to be the big climax, and unfortunately I didn't do my research in advance, and it looks like they're doing some kind of building work inside. There's a lot of scaffolding up, and we can't really see the interior in its normal splendour. I mean, obviously it's important that they're doing restoration work to help preserve the pub for the future. So there are still corners of it where you can kind of ignore the scaffolding. I believe normally this is a really stunningly beautiful pub interior. This space started life as the ballroom of the Great Eastern Hotel. Now, at least some iteration of the Great Eastern Hotel, the building, still exists around here. It's got some ridiculous modern name instead, like the Accenture Hotel or whatever. The pub name that we see today comes from Lord Claude Hamilton, who was at one time the chairman of the Great Eastern Railway. The interior here is listed. It is believed that it is largely copied from the Hôtel de Soubise in Paris, which is now the French National Archives, and this interior was constructed in 1901, whereas the Hôtel de Soubise goes back to the 18th century, and that was designed by an architect called Germain Boffrin, and it's in the Louis Quinze style, the Louis XV style. And the Louis Quinze style marked the kind of birth of the Rococo movement. The Hôtel de Soubise also contained paintings by Charles Joseph Natoire and a couple of his contemporaries, also Pierre Charles Tremolier and François Bouchier. There are some paintings on the wall higher up here in Hamilton Hall. Couldn't quite pin them to any of those three artists. I'm definitely not an art historian, so this is a bit out of my depth here, but they are apparently reproductions, at least, in the style of possibly one or more of those three artists. Charles Joseph Natoi's paintings in the Hotel de Soubise tell the story of the Greek goddess Psyche, and it's possible that a lot of the interior here also has references to that story of Psyche and her interactions with some of the other Greek gods and goddesses. Maybe that one of those pieces of plasterwork is depicting Psyche with Hermes possibly, and another one possibly Psyche with Eros. This style of intricately carved paneling, which is very much a motif of Rococo design, is called boiserie, and I think it literally means woodwork really in French. Some sources describe this interior as being a direct copy of the Hotel de Soubise. If you look at the photos of the Hotel Soubise interior, I think it's more inspired by, and it's a riff on that. It does deviate in quite a lot of ways. There is a small mezzanine floor, and that now has its own bar as well, and that was at one time the location of the orchestra when this was a ballroom. I get the sense this is an always busy pub. It is right next to Liverpool Street Station. It is probably the main station pub for Liverpool Street. It's now, what, 3 p.m. on a weekday in January, and it is reasonably busy in there. And I think it's an absolutely stunning interior. That I imagine, like most pubs, many customers are here just to have a pint, and they're not overly concerned with boiserie and gilded paneling and so forth. But if you have a little time to stare up at the ceiling and the walls, I think you're in for a visual treat here at Hamilton Hall. Beer wise, I'm drinking a Ruby Mild of some sort, but that is pleasant enough, and it still, I think, would have come in at under £5 for a pint. It's $2.42 or something for a half. Okay, well that's it for today's tour of Central London's Wetherspoons pubs. A tiny bit of an anticlimax given the refurbishment work, but it is absolutely necessary, and obviously we can't criticise them for putting up scaffolding to repair that beautiful interior, Louis XV's Rococo interior. I mean, who would expect that in a pub, especially next to Liverpool Street Station? So I hope that's been of some interest. I think there is definitely some historic appeal to Wetherspoons pubs. I've slightly changed my mind on this outing. I think, not necessarily with that long-term continuity as pubs. Most of these places haven't dated back further than the 1990s in their use as pubs, but I think there are interesting stories to be told about the former buildings that they occupy, and yeah. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.